everybody, welcome to the Fired Up with CJ show. Today we have Antonio Sacre, and we're talking about his newly released MP3 World's Second Best Dad and his newest book, My Name is Cool. He's an award-winning performer, storyteller, and an author in residence at the UCLA Lab school. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, CJ.
So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your experience and hearing other people's stories and how in the previous segment we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and or some they acronym DEI, and how it's in the very baby steps of understanding different cultures and understanding how we can actually create one culture made up of many different voices. And I assume that's what some of the intention that you have of the school. And what I see as one of the problematic outcomes of the stories that have been told, that first of all, they're usually not personal stories, they're historical, like here's what you've done wrong. And then
Right,
people, when they try to tell their own stories, getting personally traumatized because they have to tell
right,
traumatic stories. So how do we
right.
get to a point if we can share our experiences and versus making one person be wrong or bad or guilty for being themselves? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's so interesting and so complicated. There is one thing I do want to say, and this is part of my writing process. So for sure, I love to write funny stories, and the album, The Second Best Dad, is my hijinks as being a dad, and hopefully parents will listen to it and just see themselves. The time I told my kid like, stop breathing, no air for any of you in the back. Like not my finest parenting moment. So that's obviously the humor stories are important, but these other kinds of stories, which have the bigger potential for transformation and for help in troubled times, have at the core an essential wounding. Now, when you are in the middle of a wounding, and this comes from my work in therapy and just and studying Joseph Campbell, who wrote this amazing book called Hero with a Thousand Faces. Many of these stories have this wounding at the center of it. Look at our national woundings, slavery and civil rights, and how we treated
Mm-hmm.
American Indians, Native Americans, uh, all kinds of national woundings and all kinds of personal woundings. If you're in the middle of a wounding, if your dad just died,
Right.
you can't talk about that. You are literally crying every moment. You
Mm-hmm.
are leaving the funeral. 2 years later, 5 years later, when you have transformed, now is the time to talk about it. When you have done that hard work through the wounding to get to the point where, look, this miserable thing happened to me, and now look at me. For me, my own personal story is not as traumatic. Well, I mean, it is, but it's different in a way. My grandmother died. She was old, and we knew she was going to die, and that was sad. But what happens from that wounding comes as transformation. I get to share stories about my grandmother. When you're in the middle of the wounding, me as a writer, if I can't find the transformation, I just go to therapy and I go to my journal and I go to my support system and I go to my wife and I try to find where the transformation is.
Mm.
So, specifically, slavery happened. That's miserable. My daughter's in second grade. She's just learning about it. Martin Luther King Day, right? So, like, what? What do you mean they put people in slave? That's ridiculous. Yeah, it is. Okay, so, however, this is what came out of it. So, what are the lessons? Now, obviously, we're in the middle of a lot of different woundings in the world, right? All kinds of woundings that you could think about just looking at the news. We're not at the transformation point. So what do we do? Not tell the story while in the middle of the wounding? No, we do need to have a little bit of empathy and understanding. So, okay, maybe my dad didn't just die. My dad's still alive. Okay, but do I know somebody who has died? Yes, right? So, okay, where is that empathy there? So I feel like if we're I want to be careful here because I don't want people in the middle of a wounding to not tell their story because that's the most important thing that they can do. But I do feel like when we start bringing it out into the world, the story has to be filtered through some support and some therapy and some real understanding. What do we get out of it? So
Mm.
for instance, when I was in Chicago, I wasn't aware that how Chinese people were brought to this country to make the railroads. I learned that in my early 20s. And then how Chinese people were once classified as white so they could come in and work, and then they weren't. And then it was just I learned it was a construct. It was a societal construct, and I was like, oh, well, now I have a different understanding of this. Okay, now great. Now what is the outcome of that? Okay, so the beginning is a little bit of understanding. When you understand what the Day of the Dead is with the Mexicans, it's not this scary thing with masks and skulls and skeletons dancing around. It's this great honoring of the ancestors. Oh, now I understand. Oh, this helps me with the grief of my grandmother dying. We don't
Mm,
have that tradition of sitting at the graveside. So I borrow or I steal or I use to get through. I learn from my Mexican friends how to help somebody move on into the next life.
mm,
So yeah, I think that that's part of it. For sure, like when people are in the middle of the wounding, they need to be heard, right?
mm-hmm.
So part of empathy is listening, and I have to learn this as a parent pretty much daily. I have to listen to my son when he's screaming about this math problem he's doing. He doesn't want the answer. He doesn't want me to say, tough it up, kid, or you're never getting into college. He just wants somebody to listen to him. And then when he's at a calm space, now let's try to solve the problem together. Let's try to look at this. So yeah, I mean, one of the jokes I love to tell all my friends who are parents, I'm like, hey, well, when you figured out the answer, will you call me because nobody knows how to navigate any of this stuff, right?
Yeah.
Uh, so now there is this great big, if you look at, I live in Los Angeles. I also do write for television. Nothing has been bought yet, but it's something I've been pursuing through different people asking me to, what do my stories look like in TV or film form? We're woefully underrepresented, every ethnicity that you can imagine, right? The number of Spanish speaking showrunners and writers and actors and directors, and that can go to any of the ethnicities that we have out here. So like when something like my brother's married to a woman from China, and
Mm.
we all went and saw what's the one that just came out, the big
I
famous
was gonna
movie.
say that's got to be hilarious. Like the those cultures mixed with Chinese. I got.
Oh my
I'm
God.
kind of curious about hearing about his marriage.
It's pretty funny, but but what we saw. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the movie. It was such a big movie. Asians, rich Asians,
Crazy Rich Asians.
crazy rich Asians, right? So like to see that movie, she we don't have the fact that there's so few of those that you can point to is sad.
Yeah.
Those stories do need to be told,
Yeah.
and I feel like that movie, did it with humor and whatever it was. But so I feel like there does have to be an opportunity to have people tell their stories, and those of us who are telling the stories from a place of wounding have to find that moment of transformation that makes it palatable,
Yeah.
or
That's a
even the
really good
humor in
point.
it. Where is the humor in it? And again, if you can't quite find the humor in it, and some of these wounds are so big, it's hard to even suggest that. But I feel like even in the piece you did, your TEDx piece, there was humor in you talking about your dad dying. You pulled your
Yeah.
hair down, you were the mustache, like so. Finding these moments of levity to help us laugh, so that we can then listen even more.
Yeah.
I do have a dear friend of mine who she just loves to just hammer about how miserable white people have made it for everybody.
Hmm.
While that may be true, it doesn't make us want to listen to her.
Yeah.
And what you want is you want to help people listen to you until it becomes easier.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know. One of the things I do as a storyteller, I do try to find in every story I tell, I try to. One of my early mentors, teacher said, when somebody laughs, their mouth is open so that you can dive in and touch their heart. And
Oh.
I love that, and I feel like not every joke translates in every language, but laughter is universal. You can tell any language that kid is laughing.
Yeah.
That kid is having fun, whatever. And so I feel like that helps break the barriers down a little bit. The reality of we share so much in common, even with so much that's different. Everyone's got that old grandmother. Everyone has that meal that they can remember. Everyone has that crazy uncle that's embarrassing. Everybody has said something silly to somebody they're trying to date. Everybody has said things you want to take back from raising your kids. So let's share some of those commonalities, and
Yeah.
then maybe it makes it easier to listen to each other.
I think
Again,
that
I
that's
don't know.
I think a huge insight because I think what happens, and I was taking a story writing class. It's a memoir writing class, and there was a gal in there who had just like an awful experience raising a son who had a lot of mental issues and I would read the story, and at the end, there was never a transformative moment. And at the end, I would feel traumatized. Just hearing a story, I would feel traumatized. And like, I don't even want to, I'd read the story, and if there wasn't a point of the hero's journey where the hero starts like understanding anything about life, I'd be like, I can't read this anymore because I'm just tortured by hearing the
Yeah.
story. If you don't give me a resolution, I cannot read this anymore. And so I think one of the insights that I'm getting from you is perhaps we haven't come to the insights yet. We're just in the midst of telling our trauma. So until they're really told from a place of transformative wisdom, it's just trauma, like me taking my trauma and hoisting it onto you. And it feels unbearable. Like I can relate to that when I was reading her stories. I'm almost gasping for air. It was
Yeah.
unbearable. It was
Yeah.
unbearable. So until those stories are processed, I think we can share things like, I love your idea of like, when have we felt less than? Every single person can come up with a story when they felt someone was diminishing them, that they didn't understand them. They didn't understand something that was core about that person. And then I bet if everyone shared, you could hear the common themes among
Yeah.
all those things. But
Yeah.
just sharing, and that's transformative. If you can
Yeah.
hear the story, hear the themes, and go, this is the human experience when we're not understood.
Yeah.
It pains us not to be understood. And the
Yeah.
thing that we need to do is like you did with your kids. I listen. I'm listening deeply and understanding where you are right now so I can be here with you now to support you, right? Like that's transformative. But just, reading one grim story after another without like a transformation of the two brothers that happen to come up
Right.
with, it's
Right.
too hard on our souls to be pummeled like that. But I love that's like a huge insight for me, I think. And I hope that one day I can do some DEI training just so that, and to do it in the way that you're doing your work, which is like by telling stories, because that's the most healing kind of way of doing it. So, any other thoughts before we wrap up? This has been fabulous, really
I,
interesting.
I love talking with you. Thank you so much. I do think there is one thing about, so very specifically, my wife's high school, she's a high school English teacher, has American Indian as their mascot.
Mm,
And this is painful. So what's happening is there's communities around the country that still have American Indians as mascots, whatever it is. And to be able to listen in a way like, oh, well, you know what, you should get over it, doesn't help. That, they're saying we don't like it. So if we listen closely, we're hearing, oh, they don't like it. Okay, great. We don't need to be shamed, or you know what I mean. So I feel like it's back to the listening and the empathy. If somebody's telling you they're in pain, whatever, Black Lives Matter, any number of issues, this is real for sure. And not like, oh, you should get over it. That was years ago. I never owned a slave. What are you talking? My family
right.
came. You know what I mean? Like, so I do feel that there's something about the listening, the deep listening, that it's hard to, whatever. Maybe this crisis is showing us we do have more time to listen now than we did before. We're not running around. Maybe this is a perfect time to listen more and
Yeah.
to listen to ourselves. And in some ways that's hard work to do. Um, yeah, so I guess that would be it.
That was like a perfect way of coalescing everything that we talked about. Um, Thank you so
My
much.
pleasure.
Yeah,
Such a
thank you
joy
so
to
much.
speak with you, CJ. I really appreciate it, and thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
It means so much to me that you're listening to the show. I would love your support in any way by giving me comments below or to subscribe to the show or share the show with friends. Thank you again for your support. Love and blessings.